I'll just start recording. So, brilliant. Welcome to everyone who's joined us. Welcome to Tommy, who's coming out, well, both Tommy and Phillipa. Brilliant to see you both. We're just going to start by introducing each of us, and then we'll kind of give you a bit of a rundown how the webinar is going to work. So, Tommy, can I go straight over to you for you to do an introduction of who you are?
Good afternoon, guys, and thank you very much to both of you for having me along, and thanks to everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to listen to this webinar, and thanks to the sponsors as well. Just a little brief background on myself. My name is Tommy Heffernan. I'm a vet here based in Ireland. I qualified in UCD in 2002, and I joined a mixed practice where I did a lot of pets and small animals and large animals. I did a cert of small animal medicine, became a practice partner in 2006. And I don't have it in there, but in 2008, I sort of hit a tipping point in my own career where I was quite disengaged with what I was doing, and probably the stress of running a practice and maybe not knowing what I was completely at and where I was going. I sort of reconnected with the little boy who wanted to be a vet, and really went back to farm animals. Is where that's why I wanted to be a vet in the first place. And I did several things after that. I did a grad cert in dairy herd health. One of the best courses I've ever done was a master's cow signals trainer. It was really interesting. I did some stuff in marketing. I left practice in 2017. Became a veterinary consultant, and at the same time I got an Nuffield International Farming Scholarship, which was an eye-opener for me because I got to travel around the world for 18 months into different countries and look at farming systems. At that time as well, it was difficult to run a consultancy business, so I was lucky to get the opportunity to work with the Irish Farmers Journal as their animal health specialist for 16 months, and that was really good because I got a little bit of an insight into communication and working in media. And then in 2020 I set up my own consultancy company again, and I suppose why I tell you all this is not to make myself look any better than I am, but it's in those years I've learned a little bit about communication. I certainly don't think that I'm an expert in communication, but I've learned a little bit, and I'm hoping today at a very top level to maybe talk about some of the lessons that I learned. And I set up a project in August called Vision Farming as well. So the next slide is give you kind of a bit of an insight into the way I'm thinking. So if you click on Fiona, I'm from a part of Ireland called County Kerry where we have a lot of sheep. I'm a little bit biased now. It's the most beautiful part of the world. I also got to work in Wicklow here, and we had a lot of sheep. So I've done a lot of flock work over the years. And I suppose as a young vet, I really started in the whole area of individual animal, getting my clinical skills up. And then I realized, the flock-based approach, the herd-based approach, that's where the real wins could be made. And I've got kind of interested as well in how we feed animals. Animal nutrition is a massive driver to performance and production. And I really have got interested in soil and how we grow these crops. And I think that's going to be really interesting in the future. I suppose as well with the debate around animal protein and farming, I think, and Professor Paddy Wall said it, he said we're in the business of human health in food production systems. So I think that's a really interesting concept. So I'm interested in how animal protein fits in the human health diet. Inside the farm gate, the areas that I'm really interested in is immunity. How do we improve immunity? Also, I think it's absolutely fascinating when you look at soil, animals and human health, this whole idea of microbiome and gut health and gut function. I was lucky with my Nuffield Farming Scholarship to look at the biology of animals, and I came up with this concept of an animal-centered approach. And really what that is if we look and understand what the biology of the animals and the behaviors they are, we can build better farming systems, better for the animals, better for farmers and overall profitability, but maybe more sustainable systems going forward. And then finally, the last piece of the jigsaw, and everyone's kind of aware of this, how we farm in relation to the environment, that's going to be a key driver. And I think, a lot of this is lovely on a slide and it's lovely in theory, particularly when you look at wool as the value wool is being given in the marketplace at the moment, especially when we talk about the whole sustainability piece. I think there's a lot of gaps there, but for me, this is kind of where I operate. As I said, I set up a project in August. No one here maybe wants to hear about dairy cows, but they are 2 dairy farms. But we're looking at the key pillars that drive performance on the farm. So there are 2 underperforming dairy farms. We've got a load of work to do, and we're looking at 5 pillars. But the first pillar is people. So this is one thing that I have learned, that we can talk about nutrition, we can talk about vaccination, disease, but the big driver on farms is people. So communication becomes really important. And I have to congratulate both Phillipa and Fiona on flock health clubs, because the concept of what you're doing and what's been achieved is really important. And that communication piece around where the animal health and animal systems are is really key to some of these other outside factors that are there. So that's a little bit maybe of a bit too long a version of who I am and what I'm about, but I think the next decade is going to be really exciting. And I'm going to hand over now, I think, Fiona, to two proper experts in sheep. I'm a little bit of a pretender on the whole flock health thing.
Not at all, Tommy, but that's brilliant. I think, I suppose at this stage, it's probably fair for me to just, so we wanted Tommy to say who he was, and I thought, well, it's only fair that Phillipa and I kind of give you a bit of an insight of who we are. And I suppose, and why on earth are we talking about this? Between us, we've run over 20 farmers' meetings just in the last few weeks, literally, and we're involved in farmer discussion groups, each of us locally, but also a lot in Wales at the moment. We're manically busy at the moment, still doing people's diets of all things. So although some people have started lambing and some people are starting lambing in a couple of weeks, they're still thinking, what are we doing about our diet? So we kind of, January, February is always very busy because of you rationing, but this year it seems a bit more frantic than usual. We've had over the last 2 years, 115 vets have told us that they're running a flock health club, spread across the country. That's not, some of those will be a couple of vets in the same practice, so that might only be one flock health club. And we're well aware that people have had massive issues over the last year, not just in your flock health clubs. None of us are going to start listing all the different things that we've had issues with over the last year. Phillipa could tell us a few with 2 small children and lambing sheep and everything. So yeah, that's sort of where we are. Maybe I should hand over to you at this point, Phillipa, to give us an insight of what you think we've been doing in the last few months. Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. Other than, as you said, yeah, lots of different ways of communicating, really, which is why we're talking about this today, because different to our normal work, which we would be on farm having face-to-face farmer discussions and delivering discussion groups, actually practically and face-to-face quite quickly. We've been on a really steep learning curve as well as anybody else, I think, in terms of having to do all that digitally and via the medium of Zoom and other different ways. So we have probably in a very, very short space of time had to do quite a lot in terms of farmer engagement and work out how best we can get that engagement. And it's tied in with all of our other work that we do, and the work that you've been doing, such as the Farm Vet Champions and the RCVS Knowledge, and then also as well as working with our own flocks that we're the vets for, and looking at their diets and health and all the rest of it. I've been lambing as well at home, and still am lambing at home, and trying to manage everything else just like everybody else, kids, homeschooling. So running, you've put that in there nicely, because that is the saviour. But yeah, so we are very similar to everybody else at the moment, and we're just trying to tie everything together. So really excited about this today and speaking to Tommy, so it'd be excellent.
Brilliant, thanks. And now I want to know who our audience are. So I'm going to launch this poll, and there's just 2 really simple questions here for this first poll. So we're basically wanting to know who we're speaking to. Are you a vet working in practice? Are you a vet but you're not working in practice? Or you're not a vet? We very much have targeted these 2 webinars this week and next week for practicing vets. You're very welcome if you're not a vet, but please bear with us as we're basically talking to sheep vets. I know Tommy would like to speak to a few cow vets as well, because that's his passion, but we're firmly bringing it back to sheep vets, and we're well aware that unless you're Phillipa and me, you're also dealing with cows, although every now and then we get called in. We're basically pretty much sheep. And then we also just want to know whether you're running a flock health club, whether you've got a flock health club that's currently active, or whether you've furloughed it for the last year because of the circumstances, or whether you're supporting others running clubs. And this just shows I can't count, because I've now realized there were 3 questions. And then what are your feelings about online meetings? So you're probably a bit fed up with them. Certainly, I was celebrating last night for, I think that was my 13th in that number of weeknights. And yeah, it can really become a drag, and that's what we don't want it to be. And that's why we're having this whole discussion now. Now, we've had about 70% of your votes. So often, I know it's quite difficult if you're on your phone or a tablet. So we might stop the, 80. Oh, golly, you're a good voting lot. We're nearly up to 90% votes, which is pretty good going, actually. So I think I might end the polling and share the results. I'm assuming you can see that now. So our audience, we've got 78% of you are vets working in practice. Brilliant. Welcome. It's probably a lunch time in the middle of a busy day for you. And out of this, we've got 38 of you running farmers groups, not flock health clubs, 20% of you running flock health clubs that are active. Brilliant. So, and then a quarter of you supporting others running a flock health club or group, and just a few of you, very few of you, not involved in farmers meetings at all. So actually, great. I'd like to think that we've got an audience of people who are on the same wavelength for farmers meetings. And then we go down to everyone's experiences. So the majority of you think online meetings will continue as a good thing. That's encouraging to a degree. You've yes, you've attended some really inspiring online meetings, and there's some people who've attended some really poor online meetings. I think we can probably all agree with that. A few can't wait till you never have to attend another one, and a few of you think that they're completely hopeless for farmers. So that's interesting. Maybe by the end of this, you'll have some ideas and we can see where we're going. So I'm going to stop sharing those results and move on to my next. So you probably think we've done this in a slightly random way. I wanted to do the intros first, mainly so you kind of worked out where we were coming from. And so we've done that bit. Who are we? Who's our audience? That's you guys, that's the poll. So we're going to split today into talking about communicating with sheep farmers. None of us think we're experts, we're just ourselves on a journey. And so we're going to share some of our experiences with you, and we would really be delighted if you will share your experiences with us. And then we're going to talk about online meetings specifically, what we think work, what we think doesn't work. And we've got a couple of ways of doing this. Now, we'll say later, don't try anything too complicated because it's liable not to work. And then straight away, we're going into do that. So please do use both chat and question Q&A. The chat, you can send it to panelists and attendees. The Q&A, you've got a chance to put in questions and upvote other people's questions and stuff. Then this Padlet, so this is a bit separate, and it's actually a lot easier if you've got a separate device, or if you're on a laptop with another screen. It's nothing hugely complicated. Actually, we're going to put that same URL in the chat, which I think I can do now. Too many things going on at once now. Or you can just put your other device up against the, I can't even think what you call one of those things. Thank you. Thanks, Tommy. Yeah, QR code, and then it should come up on there. I've put the URL for that in the chat. Basically, as you put your camera against the screen and pick up the QR code, it'll take you to the URL, and you should be able to join on your other screen. And actually, all we want you to do there is put in ideas for people for what you think is good for an online meeting. And I put a silly thing in there about make sure everyone's got a beer with them, which actually isn't totally ridiculous. But yeah, see how it goes. It's just another option for something that may or may not work. But otherwise, please do just use chat and Q&A. And right now, I'm going to turn back to, has everyone had a chance to pick up that QR code? Anyway, it's in the chat. If you don't, you're not going to miss much if you can't access that. It was just to show you an example of a Padlet. We'll come back to it at the end. And I'll go back to Tommy. Over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Again, thank you to both of you for having me along today. I certainly don't claim to be an expert in communication. So I was delighted to be asked along. And I suppose I've gone from my own experience of communication, and I've come up with the idea of failing to understand. So most of my lessons in communication have been around failing. And I think we all can remember maybe our first cesarean sections, our first bitch pays as vets in particular, whatever job you might be doing. And it is a journey from where you start. Some people will be very competent things when we start. And look, you know, I was a very bad communicator. And I think I've got into the middle now that I'm good. But it is a journey, and it is about experience. It takes time. And I know that a dear friend of mine and colleague, Charles Shabazz, is on this webinar today. And Charles was there when I started out communicating first. He gave me the opportunity to go and talk to some farmers at a meeting. And he tasked me with doing sustainable control of parasites and worm resistance. So I proceeded to memorize Scott's manual. I proceeded to have 50 slides packed with information. And anybody who knows Charles will know how wonderful a communicator he is. And he even has a few sheep, which I still joke about him today. So I wasn't a sheep farmer, and I wasn't a good communicator, and I put the whole audience to sleep. And I remember that night very vividly walking through the back of the room with the sleeping audience beside me. And I said, look, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to get better. But it's taken time. And I don't claim to be a great communicator. But with all things, with effort and time, we can get better. So I think we'll go to the next slide, Fiona. And again, when the guys asked me to get involved, I thought, look, I could learn, you know, give you some reams of information about communication that I might have read, but my own practical experience is the big change for me was when I started communicating with farmers, and it doesn't matter whether you're offline or online, I think the rules are the same, is when I moved from me to them. So I was really worried about looking smart myself. So I was obsessed about how I looked, how intelligent I was, that I covered the topic well enough. Then I started realizing that when I started having an effect when I was understanding my audience, what is the result I need to achieve for them? So if it's a flock health club, you know, it's the information that the farmers needed, not me standing up there to look smarter than I actually probably am. But that was one of the key things for me, is that I moved away from being worried about what I thought and the way I looked to actually really focusing in on my audience. And of course, you need some knowledge to do that. And what knowledge did I need to have to be able to achieve those results? And there's always a tipping point or a point when you start off that you can't have all the knowledge. And I certainly still don't have all the knowledge. But I think the biggest thing for me was that moving from me to them. And then how I delivered my message. And I realized the simpler my messaging, the more effective it was. And 2 Einstein quotes here. But, you know, it's really, like, if you don't understand your subject, you know, it'll be very difficult for you to explain it simply. And, you know, this takes time. But I do really now focus on that. I focus on my audience, and I try and focus on simple messages. So my simple message here is I moved from being obsessed with myself and how smart I looked. And I think maybe that's something as vets we are conscious of our peers. And I was conscious of that. I was creating content and talking about stuff for my peers as opposed to maybe my audience that were farmers. So that's it. Look, Google has democratized information. Everybody's an expert on everything now. We've seen that from, you know, we're all virologists, we're all epidemiologists, we're all vaccinologists, if there's such a word. But, you know, we once thought that knowledge was power. But I do believe that there's a huge role, and particularly where we see farming going and the challenges that are there, is knowledge is important, but it's how we understand that knowledge. Anybody can Google about watery mouth or joint ill in lambs now, but it's your ability to understand it, use that knowledge, and particularly deliver it. I read a very interesting book, because particularly technology is going to impact a lot of things like Google, and artificial intelligence will definitely change the way a lot of professionals work, doctors, solicitors, vets. And the concept of the book was the ability for us to maneuver in this new world of technology, but that coaching element for professionals is really important. So I think this line is how we understand information, use it and deliver it. And that comes down to communication, and that's offline and online. So I suppose I have learned some lessons from presenting to farmers. I certainly don't say I know it all, but particularly that 16 months with the Irish Farmers Journal gave me a really big insight into larger production of maybe written material, or I did large farmer meetings, and I've done a certain amount of online meetings. And where I've struggled a little bit is when there can be different levels of knowledge in the room. And it's very hard to pitch your presentation then. It gets really difficult when you're doing cattle and sheep, or maybe doing beef cattle and dairy cattle. So I think the added advantage of a flock health club is you sort of a cohort of people who are sort of on the same page. I think when we look at presenting to farmers, we've got exceptionally good at quantifying the economic cost of disease. And that's really important. But it can't be our only focus. One of the things, and I try and listen to people, which is supposed to be one part of being an effective communicator, is motivations for people can be really different. So social motivations, economics, some people just care about welfare, they want to do a good job. Some people are not driven solely by economics. So I think we need to be careful when we're trying to connect with an audience, particularly when we're doing the hardest job of all, which is to try and change behavior. One of the other things I've learned when presenting to farmers is they love actionable content. I think we all do. Content that we can consume, and we can go out and make our lives easier or better because of it. And I think that's really not always easy to do. But when I moved from me to them, that was something I focused more on, that the content would be something that could be applicable to farm, that it was practical, as opposed to going into how much I knew about the epidemiology of a disease, which, okay, was beautiful and I sounded great, but what was the practical steps on the farm and the practical actions that you could do to make a change? I think farmers love practical content and images, which is a massive opportunity, especially now that we have smartphones. If you're going farm to farm and you see something that's wrong or you see something that's right, taking those pictures and bringing those images into your story or presentation makes it feel a lot better. It makes it feel much more real. And again, some outcomes at the end of it. This is something I still struggle with. What are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve by our meeting? What are the tools? And maybe this is our task today, Fiona and Phillipa. What are the outcomes for the people here? But I would hope that we would give some messages around, effective communication. But there were some of the key things that I reflected on. And as I said, I'm not an expert, but I'm just reflecting on my own journey around communication.
Okay, I'm going to just launch. Thanks for that, Tommy. Brilliant. I'm going to launch this second poll to just do we just want to know how you as an audience feel about communicating with sheep farmers. So you think it's an easy thing to do? Do your farmer take your advice, etc.? And then the second question is the areas that you find you have the most challenging discussion with sheep farmers. So that's multiple choice options. Clearly, if you tick all of them, it doesn't tell us very much. So please just, tick a few of each one. It's kind of, being quite relaxed. But equally, if you want to share any experience you've got engaging with farmers in the chat, or we've got a few people putting stuff onto the Padlet. That's great. You must remind me at the end to share the Padlet with people. I've got so many different screens on boxes open on my screens at the moment, but yeah, okay, polls are coming in. That's great. We've got 20% of you voted, so we'll give you a bit more of a chance. We're in the recording. I totally realized that the polls don't come up, so what I'm going to do is read through all of the options. basically, for communicating with farmers, we're asking people whether they find it easy to change farmer behaviour, whether clients take their advice, whether you're frustrated with how little your farmers are changing, whether you find you let your farmers have medicines that you're not particularly comfortable with, whether you understand why your farmers behave as they do, or whether basically you say something and it's done, whether you only have to recommend something once. As you're still voting, I'm going to ask Tommy, there's something in the chat, I don't know if you can see that, Tommy. How would Tommy recommend approaching taking photos of bad practice in this age of data protection and consent? Do you get permission in a sensitive way?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I suppose when you build up a trust with clients, you can never. I'm not, from a legal perspective, I might be on shaky ground. I'm not talking about showing, really exposing things that might be right or wrong, but taking the opportunity to take the pictures of your lame sheep, take the pictures of your water trough. You don't have to, maybe the wrong size water trough or feed space been incorrect, or maybe just bedding that's poor. You can still do that without giving away too much information. I think there is the risk maybe if you don't get permission, but I think it's about how comfortable you are with your client. And ask them maybe for it. Can you use that for presentations online? Maybe that's something you should do to get permission. But I think we can be sensitive about, nobody will know. It's just even getting images of your lame sheep, images of just water trough. I do it. I don't ask for permission, I have to say, but I do it in a way that no one can identify maybe that farm. I think when you look at maybe taking an overall picture, and that's a different story. But it's a good question, and I'd be interested to hear your opinions as people who create a lot of content and are looking for those practical images.
Thanks. Have you got any comment there, Phillipa?
Yeah, just to say, echo what Tommy said. When you've got that trust, it's building that trust with that farmer, and explaining why you might want to take the image and why you might want to use it, and if it's being used as an example of an improvements going from one scenario to another over a period of time with actions, then that can be a really good. Farmers are very happy to show that. So it's certainly building trust, and it's having that relationship with them, I think, more than anything, before just going ahead and sort of using content.
The one challenge I would see as well is when everything can be taken out of context. So, everything can be made look bad if it doesn't have an explanation to it. So it is a challenge when you put content up on the internet, or maybe used in presentations that it can be used again. It's a great question, but I think unless we are willing to show people vision, something that they can envisage themselves and show examples of that, it's very hard, because we're all visual creatures, or well, I certainly am. And I think it really adds to, and I like what Phillipa said, that if we can have a before and after, even better again.
That's Ian's just put an interesting thing on the chat to remember. It's possible to work out a map reference from a smartphone image, which is a timely reminder for us mainly. But yeah, I think we probably can't ask too much permission these days. But and I think that's probably, we quite often get away with it, don't we, between us, which is not it's not a defence maybe, but
decide yourself. I think, look, it's absolutely a risk, but I think, how do we move the dial forward unless we kind of show people where things are, or what visual examples? That's the beauty of being on farm. I mean, that's, I'm working 2 farms that we set up, and we've so many things wrong. And it's a great place to be, because we have to improve, and we cannot all have shiny new sheds. We've got to move to a place, and we've got to practical solutions. So look, it's an interesting conversation. I'm probably willing to have the conversation and take the risk around the picture.
Yeah, and the more you talk to your clients, and they trust is important, isn't it? And but honesty as well. Okie doke. Let me just share these poll results. So this is quite interesting. How you feel about communicating with sheep farmers. The vast majority of you understand why your farmers behave the way they do, which is great, because that's always a good place to start. But also, that you think your clients usually take your advice, which is also a good thing. Not everyone voted, we just had 45 people vote there, but those are all both encouraging. I suppose less encouraging is a frustration that people have. 42% of you frustrated with the lack of change in your farmers, but if you put that against understanding why they behave as they do, then recognizing that we are all on a journey. And 18% of you have let your farmers have medicines that you're not completely comfortable with. That's interesting and probably honest. The next question we asked was, as a vet, what do you find the most challenging discussions with your sheep farmers? Now, well, at least we can see that not everyone has just voted yes to all of these. But the one that people find the most challenging is in the control of neonatal lamb disease. And then second most challenging is in the appropriate use of medicines. So that's kind of where, as we talk through communication, I've focused in on neonatal lamb, so that's kind of helpful. Kind of guessing that's where people really find it difficult. People are finding it challenging talking about good flock nutrition, financial discussions. I don't know whether those two maybe reflect your own competence. So for each of us, when we're talking behaviour, we all need to feel competent and equipped to have discussions, and maybe the nutrition and the financial discussions come into that. Certainly where we've held CPD sessions, they're always popular with vets who feel they want to increase their own competence in having those discussions. And actually, I think that's probably reflected in fewer of you are concerned about having conversations about introducing useful vaccination, for example, or in the control of abortion, or even in the control of lameness. So lameness goes both ways, really. Some of you find that's a struggle, not. So I think that's interesting. There are all conversations that we struggle with. Sorry, worm control is another one that people are finding challenging discussions. The stuff that is kind of the bread and butter of the sheep vet, to be talking about these things, but they're not all easy conversations. And I think we all recognise that. Now, just stop sharing.
It also shows, Fiona, that there's huge opportunity here to look at how we are engaging with all these different subjects and where we can sort of improve in them. So that's quite encouraging, that there's still areas where we can all work and improve within our own practices and within our own individuals as well. So that's quite encouraging.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, actually. Definitely. So I'm really delighted you all said neonatal lambs, because that's exactly, I did not just prepare this slide, but it is totally topical, isn't it? That is what we're talking about. That's what most of our meetings over the last few weeks and months have been talking about. And I think it's really key that we totally recognise that farmers who prophylactically treat all their lambs with antibiotics, they believe they've done that, they've done it for a while, and they believe they're doing the right thing, and they also believe that they have no other option. So I've actually been so encouraged in the last few weeks in farmer discussion groups by speaking to a number of farmers who are no longer treating every single lamb prophylactically. I think we have made huge progress, but that's not to say that it's not a really difficult conversation. And I'm quite sure it's a difficult conversation that all of us are having on a daily basis right at the moment, as farmer comes in and asks for his crate load of Spectam, or as all the discussion groups are, there isn't any Orijet. Farmers are really, really concerned as they come up to this stressful time of lambing. And so I think, and some of you will have seen this slide from me before, there are plenty of farmers who absolutely want to dose every lamb at birth, whether that's dose with an oral antibiotic or whether it's inject every lamb. And they are fully doing that because they think they have no other option. And really, as vets, it's our responsibility to talk them through this change. And that's, we talk about breaking the flock down, talking about colostrum, plan, prevent, protect, all the things that this webinar is not about. But the business of, identifying high risk, low risk lambs, targeting treatments, allowing for change. But what we need is this change. And all change requires a loss. So I'll just go through it in detail. I am not an expert on behaviour change, but there are a few things that we've picked up. And the first one, in terms of a loss, is affirming. So building that self-belief in the farmer and self-confidence. So, and we all know, if we go in there all guns blazing and say, you can't have that, or even worse, the farmer phones up and the receptionist says, oh, you can't have that this year. That's a brilliant way to get everyone's backs up. And actually avoiding the criticism, and this I find quite tricky. We're going to talk about discussion group meetings where in a group and farmers suddenly feel they're back against the wall and you're getting criticism or disapproval from either yourself doing the group or from the other farmers within the group. Straight away you can see them in a defensive position. So in whatever way we can is try and affirm them in their self-confidence is a start, and then just listen to gain that empathy. What is it? And it's not, it's well, okay, so why do you do that? What brought that about? And yeah, I think this is quite interesting, and this is what we so miss online, is all those subtle communication things that where you're just seeing a screen or someone's face, or what the kids do. They do not turn their videos on, so they sit through online lessons, and it's like teenagers across the country have had this, we don't turn our cameras on, we won't turn our cameras on. And I really feel for secondary school teachers trying to engage with no cameras. So we do need ears, eyes, all our senses to work out and listen. And then there's the open questioning, so what about, tell me about, describe that. Why does that happen? What do you think about this? As opposed to getting a flat no, which is then hard to move on from. So open questioning, summarising, and then, so that's kind of playing it back to the farmer and saying, okay, so you do that because you think, or something that shows that you're listening and you want to hear why they're doing what they're doing, and trying in whatever way you can not to sound judgmental about that, which is sometimes difficult. And I know I give it away in my face all the time. I stand in farmers' discussion groups and everyone else, the farmer says something and I'm, did you hear it? And everyone else, all the other farmers are going, you gave it all away on your face then, Fiona. I was just like, I know, I have to keep a more, but you can't. So not judging, but then really supporting those self-motivating statements. And yes, somebody who wants to, or thinks, or, that actually, how can we support that change? And so those I want to, I can, I will, actually, if we're expecting them to change, we have to recognize that they are on a circle of change. And they may well be up in this total pre-contemplation. They're not even thought about it. So they have no intention of changing. It hasn't crossed their mind. And if you go in there, or if that's when they phone the receptionist who says, oh, you can't have any Spectam this year, we're not selling it, straight away, they had no intention. They're completely not there, and they are really cross now. So from that pre-contemplation, you go to they're aware there's a problem, they're aware they might have to have a conversation, but they've not in any way committed that that's something that they want to do. And the next stage is preparation. So, there are some farmers who are still way back there. They haven't even, they're just starting to prepare. And that might be that you start to have the conversation about how can you go about it. Ideally, now is not the time to have this. This should have been something you did a couple of months ago, but we are where we're at. But actually, some sort of preparation is important before they can act to modify their behaviour. And this I think is what's really frustrating, but we see it all the time. And when you're having a conversation with farmers, and it might be, say, lameness, that you thought you'd gone through the 5-point plan, you thought you put everything in place, they'd agreed, they prepared, they'd acted, and they were on this sort of boring, let's go, let's keep recording, let's keep trying it. And then they just went straight back to, oh, I just got the vet in and got them to jab everything with, I just turned to a bottle of Jackson and jabbed the whole lot because a massive relapse because it's all too overwhelming, they can't do it. And then we go back in the circle again. But I think where the farmers are in those, it depends on the different diseases, different circumstances, whatever we're talking to, but understanding that there is a cycle that's going on is important. But the other way of looking at it is not just a cycle, and I borrowed this one off the internet, so I have to credit it's quite freely available, this picture, but actually the pictures really reflect, I think, where our farmers are. So this is not so much a cycle as this the phases of change. And if you think of farmers dosing lambs, this actually is a picture of my daughter when we went next door to lamb a couple of years ago. And the very first thing she was told, every lamb gets a dose of antibiotic, to which I had to take a deep breath. But a lot of farmers, and you will have farmers within your discussion groups, within the practice, who are still in total denial. This is what we do, it's not us, we're in denial. And then we get to the realization, and the realization happened nationally maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where we started logging sales of oral antibiotics, and we realized we were selling 11.5 million doses of Spectam and Orijet to our lambs. So we had a national realization that, crikey, something's not right here. And you will have all recognized the resistance and the anger, and you see that within farmers in different groups. You know, sometimes it's just incredulous that we can even suggest that they should change because of this. Don't you care about welfare? Don't you care that I'm going to have lambs dying? So we've got to recognize this, and it's a phase that they will be going through. And as you come down to this is often described as quite a low or depressing stage. And then you get, sometimes the line here is really jaggedy, as people are experimenting or exploring different options. And that might be giving them a Brix and discussing colostrum as they're going, okay, so what can I do? Can I try this? We'll talk about, we've got a project on at the moment, but you know, as nationally, we've got farmers going through this. Are there other options? Should we be doing something else? And that's also a bit up and down until we're there. And we've come in discussion groups or on farmers' blogs of farmers saying, that's something I used to do, I don't do it anymore, it's not necessary. You know, we've moved on from that, and just recognizing that we're all in different places with it. So I just, I don't know if that comes up, my screen's about to turn itself off. I just want to say, I am not an expert with farmer behaviour, and I just wanted to use this as an opportunity to give you a quick advert for the Farm Vet Champions, which is the other thing that we're involved in at the moment in quite a big way alongside, it's our CBS knowledge of running it. But if you're at all interested in farmer communication behaviour, and you want to explore it by somebody who is an expert, as opposed to me, who's just given you the noddy view, this is free to sign up to, and there are going to be 16 separate free to access CPD modules, and quite a big part of it will be on farmer behaviour and communications, why people behave as they do and how we communicate those difficult things. So in terms of responsible use of medicines and neonatal lambs, but it's all food producing animals in the UK. It's not just a sheep thing. Dairy, beef suckler units, cattle young stock, game birds, turkeys. If you're at all interested in persuading your farmers to change and getting on that, then I just encourage you to sign up, and I will put that in the chat, that URL as well. But if you Google RCVS Knowledge and Farm Vet Champions, that's freely available. So you know, have a look at it. And that's been behaviour and communications in the bigger picture. And we're now going to focus in more on looking at actually the online medium, which we're all dealing with now. So I'm going to turn over to Tommy again.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. It's interesting. I was with a farmer probably 3 weeks ago, and he said to me, the only thing that's constant in life is change itself. So change happens, but it's a very difficult thing. And just my own experience as well. I was very much, this is wrong, that's wrong. So I found, when you go on to farm, finding the things that work and start there and building that confidence around, well, you're doing this well, you're doing that well, and then maybe helping people, guide them to the realization that maybe this is where it should be, this is where you're at, and how do you move it. So it's not an easy journey, but that's really fascinating stuff. Okay, so communication online. I think we will all agree on one thing: it is not easy to do, and I don't have a magic formula for communicating online. And it's been a journey for me, but I will really go back to the fundamentals of communication that I've learned. And again, I'm not an expert, but I've thought about, when I was asked to do this, what have I learned? And I've learned by failing, and I have failed to prepare in the past. And that's when I've been really caught out, be it online or in physical meetings. Going in ill-prepared on what I was going to say, messaging was wrong, and I didn't have the knowledge to back up what I was supposed to do. And that's a terrible place to be in. And it took me a while to get used to that was the wrong thing to do. The other thing that I have learned, and this is a little bit deeper and more philosophical maybe, is, I've thought about the people who've impacted me with good communication online meetings. We said, look, a lot of us have been on good meetings, a lot of us have been on bad meetings, but passion is something that's really important. It connects with people. And, this is from cradle to grave. At this stage in my career, I spend a lot of time working. I might as well do work that I enjoy and really give it my best. And that's something very fundamental to me and what I'm about. I think, and people will buy into that passion, so if you don't want to be presenting on a topic or doing a meeting, people will see through it. And we'll all have different ways of displaying our passion for something. But it's a really fundamental part of it. And to quote one of the most famous vegans ever, was Steve Jobs said, we're going to spend a large amount of time working. Why not do great work? And I think it's a really important thing. And when it comes to communication, it takes time. Some people can rock up and just be brilliant at it, but they're in the minority. It takes time and effort to get better and better. And that's what I said. And I hope Charles is still online. Watching Charles Shabazz that night, my first time communicating, he is and was like then a wonderful communicator. And it takes time to get to that. But you look at people and you say, oh, I want to be there straight away. It takes time. I think for me online as well is, what are our messages? If you're doing a flock health club and it's pre-lambing, what are the messages you want to get across? 40% or more, still struggle with that early lamb losses. And it is still a big area of critical function. So is that the area? What are the key messages? Again, when you're doing up a presentation, is it your slides or is it yourself? Is it a combination? And is there a story? Is there a start, beginning, and end to it? So, not overcomplicating your presentation. And that was a great question. Again, I wasn't prepared for today about whether you have the right to take people's photographs and use them. And maybe that's something I probably continue to do, but it's something, I didn't think about. But having your presentation visual helps with farmer meetings, I think. This is a bit of a deeper philosophical question as well that I have asked myself when it comes to communication. And this has taken me a long time, is who are you? We all have different ways of communicating. We're all different people. And for me, a lot of time, I had to get comfortable in my own skin. I have an awful problem with speaking too quickly. I still have it written on my wall here: slow down and emphasize your words. But getting comfortable in yourself, and this takes time, and particularly maybe I'm focusing this on people who are just starting out in the education phase, or who have never run a flock health club before but want to do it, and that fear. So I think we all have to get comfortable with who we are. We all can't have the knowledge, we all can't be brilliant, effective communicators, but if we're comfortable enough in our own skin and comfortable enough in our own views, and our moral compass isn't too skewed, we'll get on okay. And people always connect with people. There's lots of people who don't like me. There's lots of people that do like me, and they like people with other values and qualities and different ways of communicating. But the easiest person to be when you communicate is yourself. Probably a bit of a deeper one, but I think it's a really important one for me. So getting engagement. Look, we even, maybe the guys will agree with me, it's hard online. I can't see the whites of people's eyes here today. You could have your screens turned off, muted, and you're watching Coronation Street midday runs. You're not getting this joke if you are, but you know, it is so hard when you can't see people. We are visual creatures. We mirror each other's reactions. You can get an audience. So that night when those farmers were asleep, I had lost them. So it can be so difficult. It's probably easier when you have a flock health group and you know them. You can go into and ask that question. Asking someone from the group, it makes it easier. It's difficult in webinars where you can't see people. I think the Zoom meetings work better because you can have that sort of interaction. And I think as well, when you're doing meetings as well, having that period before you kick off where people are just catching up. Usually it's the weather, COVID, or maybe thankfully now that sports back, people might talk about that. That period of people just settle in and then we kick off. But asking
I'll just interrupt you there, Tommy, because so we've done a load of meetings in Wales. The worst start to a meeting is when everyone is talking a different language. So I was sitting there waiting to start the meeting and they've already all done that. Are you lambing? What's the weather like? And then you come in cold. Actually, you've missed all that chat, and it really makes it obvious to you then that chat and being a part of that chatting, you know, instead of the awkward, everyone sitting on their hands at the beginning of the meeting, I won't say anything because I'm the speaker. That's so valuable, that just the back chat. So sorry, carry on, but yeah, that's an important one.
It is, and it's easier when you know a group. So one thing I found with the online communication is it's easier when you know a group because you can have some fun, and you know the personalities are just moving to the digital space, and you know everyone's comfortable with the children running in the background or the dog is barking, and you can say to people, oh look, just you know, it's easier. But I think we have to remember, and the chat function is useful. I find when I have chats and polls and everything that I'm distracted, so I tend to just focus on my presentation and then have the chat after. But one thing when we're looking for engagement, we must recognize the fear. You know, people are afraid of asking silly questions. People like me are afraid of not having the right knowledge and looking stupid or saying the wrong thing. Fear is something that drives us all. So that makes engagement difficult online. So if we can dispel fear, we do that by trust, and over time with groups, that definitely helps. But sometimes it's hard. And I had a group I did some milk quality stuff with, and nobody asked any questions. It was just, I was going, my God, this has been a disaster. No engagement. And I always look for feedback after my meetings to try and see what went right, what was working, what we need to do better. And I got fabulous feedback from that meeting. And I've had meetings where we've had loads of interaction and I've got feedback, you were all over the place. There was no structure. So I think just recognizing that it's difficult and people are afraid. The more we can relax people, the more that they'll become involved in it. So that'll be my very simple. I mean, there's nothing magic about what I'm telling people, but it's just my experiences.
Phillipa.
She's watching.
Sorry, just unmuting it. I was not. Yeah, so just to follow on actually, so talking about discussion group meetings and emphasising a lot of what you've said, Tommy, it's hard when so I've done quite a lot of these between us. We have Fiona and I, and like I said, it's a new way of communicating almost. And when you know the farmers, it can be a lot easier, like you said, because you can start that conversation and that gives others in the group confidence to join in. But when you don't know them, which we haven't done in some situations, many situations, it can be really hard to know who to pick on. But sometimes you kind of have to. So I think having the videos on is really useful if you can encourage people to get them on, but making sure they're muted, just because that can discourage people who have started a conversation possibly, and then if someone interjects or there's background noise, it can put them off. So but being able to see them is so important. And a few meetings that I've done, again, where you're talking to a black screen with just a red mute microphone, can be really demoralizing and disheartening, but sometimes the Wi-Fi signal means that is what you have to do, and so you just have to adapt really. So if that is the case, this is where the chat function actually really is useful, and you can get people to type into that questions. They might feel a bit more comfortable, and actually it might encourage discussion because they feel more comfortable typing the question in there, and then you can speak about and respond to that person. So you can use that if they're a really difficult group to get talking. And also if they can't have their videos on for Wi-Fi reasons. And then when the videos are on, I've just put like check their name, because sometimes the name clearly Maureen is not Maureen when it's a man sat there.
But when they're in Wales, that makes I have embarrassed myself on so many meetings by calling someone their daughter or their wife's name and not even being aware myself, or not being able to pronounce it, which is great for an icebreaker. But I've now started with the very first 5 minutes is just renaming everybody, so they've got a name that I can recognize and I can call them something that is at least half sensible, because otherwise it is embarrassing, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with asking again, sorry, can I just check who's speaking now, what's your name? And that just helps with the flow really, and helps break the ice a little bit, I find. And then I think if you're not getting any response and you do know somebody, it's easier, as I said, to kind of pick on them. But also sometimes people, I think, feel involved if you can say their name. So pick on the name that you can say, and you're quite confident that is likely to be who it is, and just ask that person a question. And if it's too embarrassing for them, then it is, and move on. But yeah, that can be useful. And I think I've put pause and ponder before discussing, because that just shows that I think you're thinking as well, and giving those people time to think. I find I just continue to talk sometimes because I don't like that silence, and I do it constantly every single day. And I need to learn to shut up and wait for a response, because I don't like that awkward silence, but you get that with discussion group meetings all the time. So I kind of maybe look at something, Coronation Street on the telly or something, as Tommy thinks, and just to give myself a break and let people start to respond and start to type in the chat, and that kind of helps. And then just finish with open questions, going back to vet school, comms studies, what we all used to do, and we all had to pretend to go in and ask questions, all that basic stuff, not getting a yes or no answer, but asking their experience of lameness in the flock, feeding this time of year, and then just try and get some response back. But they can be very difficult to do to start with, and it's taken me quite a while to get into the gist and the confidence of being comfortable delivering these and working with these discussion groups. But they can be really rewarding once you get used to it. And so just talking about, so we talked about how you can use polls, and you've seen how Fiona's used them in this meeting, and we'll see the QR scan code thing at the end, if you remember to bring up. And then this was Mentimeter. So this was, we used this on Monday actually with a larger group. So this was a group that I didn't know at all. They were a Ladies Who Lamb Facebook group, and we were talking about a book actually, and we got asked questions, and this was just one way of how they displayed some information. So all the different names, which is quite visual, with the different sheep breeds, and then we did one for whereabouts they were in the UK, so that was really good, and it just gives people something to look at whilst you're talking. And then also just to see how many sheep they had in their different in their different flocks. And going back to what Tommy was saying earlier about understanding your audience and understanding how and what you need to deliver for them is really important. Because whilst we might like dealing with larger flocks, and for example, where smallholders we might find them a bit more difficult or a bit more challenging, or can be annoying sometimes. We just need to understand how to put that information across to them, because it's very different sometimes to how to put that information across to maybe more experienced or larger flocks, and there's nothing wrong with that, but to deliver a good meeting, we have to understand the audience, and so doing a poll like this can be quite useful when you're doing it even within your own practice, because you need to sort of know and remind yourself who's there and what they've got. And it can be quite challenging when you've got a real spread, and you'll get this in your practices where you've got your smaller flocks and you've got your larger flocks, and being able to accommodate the two and make everybody feel included can be a challenge. So I haven't got any major answers for that, but just to at least know what's there can be quite useful.
Yeah, I think if it's an embarrassing question, the online polls are really good because they give people a chance to answer honestly, which in a discussion group, when you face people and you say, so abortion, have any of you had a problem with abortion? No one will answer. They definitely will not put their heads above the parapet. And so I've started asking that in a totally different way. I'll say, so does anyone vaccinate against abortion, or something that's a less in your face question? But when you've got a bigger meeting, so this webinar a couple of weeks ago where there were 150 farmers signed on, and we did it in polls, and I had no idea when they were lambing. So I'm talking to them in January. Am I talking to them about sorting out their diets, or am I talking to people who have literally just walked in from the lambing shed? And so to ask them, which month do you start lambing? It straight away, I knew that at least half my audience were still a month or so off lambing, but it meant that they then also knew who their co-audience were, and they could put themselves a bit in the box. And, so how many ewes you're lambing, the contrast to how I was talking to these Welsh farmers where predominantly they had larger flocks, compared to this meeting here where the vast majority were dealing with a small to up to 50 flocks. You just completely change your language and how you go. So I think in a larger practice meeting, voting is great. It's great if you're all in a hall and you can get people onto their phones and answer the slightly harder questions without putting their hands up. I think if it's all on if you're in a meeting room in a room, it's nice to see people talking. Gone are the days, but I do remember when we all stood in the same rooms together, and it was good to see people actually asking the questions. I suppose this large Welsh meeting, one thing I wanted to also know was what was on their mind. And I think the more you can ask your audience that from the start, is the one thing you want to take away from this meeting, and then make sure that you've answered that by the end of it. So here I just said, what is it you're most worried about? And actually we got pretty much a quarter were most worried about watery mouth, a quarter most worried about joint ill, a quarter about the ewes not having enough colostrum, and then the other, fifth about other things. So, but it at least lets you know where your audience are, and it means you can definitely engage with the things that they're thinking about, because we all have our own agendas. But that's totally pointless. It's a bit like Tommy said at the beginning. I know what I want to look like and how I want to sound. If my audience is not interested, well, I may as well not start. Actually, they've come to the meeting because they want to go away with something. So let's find out what they want to go away with and make sure they do go away with that or whatever. The other thing that I think is really interesting in big farmer meetings is actually to find out how big the problem is. So a lot of farmers, for example, talk about watery mouth as if it's a massive thing. And then you ask them, okay, so how many cases of watery mouth did you have last year? And in this particular meeting, so the vast majority either had no cases of watery mouth or in fewer than 1% of their lambs. Okay, there's a bunch here who had it in up to 10% of their lambs. Nobody at all had it in over 10%. So, and I'll talk about that with farms. I go, every single case is distressing. I understand that. I understand you don't want any case of watery mouth. But if you have 500 ewes, maybe 700-800 lambs, and or if you have less than 5 out of 500, so less than 5 cases of watery mouth, and you're thinking you're going to give 500 doses of antibiotic because you don't want these 5 cases, that is disproportionate. So you can start to, but you can only have that conversation when you know where they're at. If they're saying, actually, I have 100 cases, well then, you can temper it, but we need to know where people are at before you can have that discussion, I suppose. So that's one of the ways we use polls, and I think in the larger meetings they're really, really useful.
Fiona, there's a question there that's come in, maybe because you're presenting. This is the challenge of when presenting and looking at chat functions. It's a good question. Do you need multiple screens to run polls?
If you're doing it within Zoom, we're just going to talk about different platforms. So if you're within Zoom, like we've done the polls today, you can do that all with single, and it amazes me how easy it is to interact with Zoom polls in the way that this audience have. So we had over 80% of this audience vote, and I'm quite sure there will be people within the audience today who are on a smartphone, so you haven't got a chance of different screens. If you're going to use a polling system that's outside of a different, so like our Padlet that we've got, or Kahoot, or one of the Polev, one of those different systems, then you need two different screens. And we've ditched Kahoot quizzes and stuff within it because we know that people are basically on single screens. So it depends how you know your audience are looking at it. But if they're good at manipulating different screens and they're doing it on a laptop, you can use different things, which I do with students a lot, but I don't generally do with farmers because I try and keep it within the system. So I wouldn't have done the Padlet with farmers. Maybe is now the time to share that. Maybe not. Let me just stop sharing and share the Padlet. And it's a good time maybe to bring that in.
Because it's interesting watching that while you're pulling that up. What I see is this phenomenal data there that you've got at the start of the meeting that you can acquire with your audience. It's probably a mistake I make is I avoid polls because I don't want the hassle of moving around and trying to interpret data within my screen. But it is a really powerful tool to have to know where your audience are and then tailor your presentation after that.
Yeah. So now on that very point, am I now sharing the Padlet or not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am. Oh, good. It has worked. So this is what. So this was just asking you all to put your top tips in. If you haven't done so yet and you still want to, then it's just clicking on this little plus at the bottom. And so what have people said? Online, as no one's seeing you presenting, you can have some prompts and key facts stuck around your computer to help you with any unforeseen questions. That's a very good idea. Actually, I had to do a radio interview the other day. I was terrified about it, but I had all my things around the screen so that and no one else could see it. Which is great, which you don't get that opportunity in a main meeting. You can forget the bottle of beer because I just put that in as a warm up. Although it's always good to have a bottle of beer as a warm up. Invite attendees to describe their experience, pre-plan, choose the right attendee to offer their thoughts. And that's a good idea. We all know there are farmers who love talking about themselves, and there are other people who really don't want to talk about themselves. So if you do know who your attendees are in a small meeting, and you can pick on but you don't want those guys to dominate. So that's some and some, isn't it? If you always have the same person talking, it spoils it a bit. So finding whatever way you can to draw out your more shy clients is a good idea. Farmers like food. Oh, the days when we could all go to the pub together for a meeting, those will come back again. Have a WhatsApp group. So Phillipa's about to talk about our WhatsApp groups actually, and we use those a lot. In fact, possibly they become a bit overwhelming, but I agree, a WhatsApp group does work well. Keep meetings small and interactive, same types of farmers. Yeah, if we mix, it is really hard to mix smallholders. I can so clearly remember meeting, and this wasn't a face-to-face one in Norfolk, but there was a smallholder who was a really dominant person, but right in the middle at the front of the meeting, and they kept asking questions and they kept giving their experience of their 6 sheep, and you could just straight away see everybody else turning off, as they weren't interested in those 6 sheep. It didn't affect them, and I think it can work the other way too. With so yes, I agree. Smallholders and commercials are not necessarily good to put together.
If that was online, I don't know, did you see the video? Is it Jackie Weaver, the council meeting UK.
Yeah.
She just someone was interrupting her, so she just removed them from the meeting. It's quite a watch if you want to watch it on YouTube. You can't do that in real life though.
Yes, no, that's yeah. You can use actually if you search it, it gets up really quickly, doesn't it? It's gone really. Yeah, encourage questions, encourage tips. Yeah, that's basically what we're doing here. Getting your experiences as far as possible. As interactive breakup sessions, keep them short. Yes, and that's something that we haven't done here. We thought on purpose, we're not going to tell people it's an hour when we're going to go on for more than an hour. So we've tried to be honest about that. But I agree, and there are definitely times I will not watch a webinar if I think they're going to just go on. I want to have it in a certain timescale. So I think, yes, you've got to be honest about it. And often I'd keep sessions short and include quizzes. Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing that now. Please feel free to put more stuff onto it as you like. And I will go back to, so this is just another idea, which is if you've got a group where you've got some contact with them in beforehand, whether you have an active voting system that involves them moving around as opposed to clicking in buttons. So we've done this with a few more engaged groups. I wouldn't do it with a farmers group when they're not really there, but if you've got a group of people who are really keen to be interactive and you can persuade them before the meeting. So I did this with some CPD for vets and actually asked people to bring along items so they can wave it in front of their camera. It becomes a bit silly, but sometimes silliness is what we need at the moment. So we've certainly had university staff meetings where everyone puts on a different hat. It just happened completely spontaneously, but by the end of the staff meeting, everybody's video and they're all wearing a different silly hat, and it's just like what a relief. So you know, if you can think of anything that is not just tedious or lists of bullet points or whatever. So yeah, the voting system, red, orange, green, worked. Yeah, somebody's cat's put something in the chat. Have regular short breaks if you're going in for an hour, and I would agree with that as well. And I would have put a 10-minute break in here, so we allow people to go. We just thought people having lunch that they might disappear. So that's a good point though. Really, really good to have breaks in where possible.
Don't drink a litre of coffee like I did one day before I went into a meeting for 2 hours. Those are the simple things as well.
That's a very good point. Yeah, and here there's a massive blizzard and snowstorm for me to go out to the loo. So yeah, platforms. Personally, I like Zoom because I find it really flexible and the polls work really well. And yeah, obviously everyone's aware you can have a free Zoom account. You get 40-minute meeting. That's generally not good enough for farmers. But if you sign up for account, it's £20 a month. You only have to pay for the month. If you do the webinar option, which is what we've got here, and so which is a shame because it means we can't see your faces, but equally, you know, we had 140 signed up for this webinar. We only ever have half as many sign in live as the ones who've registered. So out of the 140 who signed up, there's 60 odd on the webinar now, and the others will watch as recordings, but don't expect there to be all of them. Farmers, you'll get more of them. If a farmer registers, in my experience, 80 or 90% will actually turn up to the webinar. But vets, it's about 40-50% usually, but they'll probably watch the recordings. So Microsoft Teams, you probably got free access to that with your Microsoft account. Personally, I am not a fan of Teams, but it works, it's okay. It's just, it also glitches quite a few times in my experience. So, but some people are really used to it. Anyone, schools, universities, they're so used to using it now that makes it easy. It sometimes isn't very nice to people that are guests of the organisation. So it works better for everybody within that organisation, but then sometimes people don't have access to the chat or to the polls or whatever, so it's not necessarily brilliant for external. Or Hazel's put that Teams are now offering breakout rooms. That's right. you can do breakout rooms on Teams, you can do breakout rooms on Zoom. That's all more complicated than I usually use for farmer or vets meetings, but it's quite possible. And then these additional features, so Kahoot, quizzes, Polev, Padlets, that's fine with either another device. And most people do, they've got their phone, but they might be watching the webinar on their phone, and then they, but that works. I think we've talked cost and ease of use. Connection's really key. I mean, we are really lucky here. We don't have any. We use a mast across the valley, and if the mast's down, we are completely out of communication, which is why we're lucky that it hasn't happened today. But most people you want to plug in if you can. If you don't live in the middle of nowhere, then you can do that. Yeah. Any other top tips for quiet spaces? That's why Philippa's not in her own home. Anyone who's been to a sheep vet AGM and Philippa was being attacked by 2 children at once, changing in their pajamas, it was yeah, there's always options.
It wasn't pretty, no.
Yeah, I agree with find a quiet space. But in my office is in town here, and like I've had occasions. So I remember one of my biggest meetings ever. The council started beginning roadworks underneath the so like sometimes things just go wrong and you just kind of have to flow with it. With all the best preparation in the world, just things go wrong. That's an interesting one about what's the best time for engagement. Again, we probably prefer during the day if you're in practice, you're trying to run it, but from asking the question to farmers post meetings, always 80% of them prefer 7:30 or later in the evening, which it's just something from my own experience. So if you're looking for more attendance, evening seems to be best. Although a lot of our discussion group meetings would have been during the day, but I don't know what your opinion is on that. Yeah,
well, with everyone sort of gearing up for lambing, it's evening generally. At lunchtime, I mean, they always used to say lunchtimes were good for dairy farmers. I think middle of the day meetings are difficult for farmers generally. It's more weather dependent. I think I would often be doing a series of meeting and praying for rain because rain mean they turn up and a sunny day. Yeah, no one's there. So I think evenings probably are better for farmers. And actually, I think it's amazing how many other members of the family are often present. If you've got, it's just in the middle of it, so almost then you're like the telly that everyone in the family is kind of watching whatever the discussion group is. It's not usually the same quality as a telly, but yeah, so that's for platforms. Other comments on that? Otherwise, Philippa, there's engagement outside the meeting.
Yeah, so we touched on this a little bit, and it was actually mentioned on your Padlet as well. Somebody said about WhatsApp groups and communication, especially now outside of meetings, and they can be really, really useful. So I suppose there's WhatsApp and there's Facebook or Messenger groups on Facebook, which are all great because you can share photographs and you can share things like scan results and things like that, and they're free to use, just requiring Wi-Fi. So they can be really good. They can become a little bit all-consuming, depending on how many you've got, and I think you have to set a bit of an expectation as to when you might be able to reply to some of these groups. I have quite a lot of WhatsApp groups because I've got quite a lot of discussion groups. I've probably got way too many, and probably definitely double figures of WhatsApp and Messenger groups, but they can be they're really supportive, and a lot of them can be quite supportive socially for the farmers, and for us as vets, because we can keep up to date with what's actually happening on farm if they're talking about weather or what they're actually doing, and you can learn quite a lot from a farm side in terms of farm management and possibly looking at what they're doing crop wise. Things like that can be really useful. And then likewise, they can be really good for getting information out there to quite a lot of farmers quite quickly. So if it's parasite information about fluke risk, or if you want to share something off the NARDIS website about disease, you can easily send links from there and share that on your WhatsApp groups, which is brilliant. So that can be really useful. Instead of you having to write a full spiel, you can actually quickly go onto that site and send that link. So that can be really good. And also, especially if it's your farmers that know each other, and if you maybe try and group them, someone mentioned about smallholders and commercial farmers. If you did set up your WhatsApp group, maybe based on what your flock health clubs are, or those kind of groups, that can be useful as well. So you can get good discussion where they've got trust within each other, and then they even start their own benchmarking. So that can be the start of looking at, what their scanning results might be, or what their lambing and rearing percentages might be, and they almost initiate that themselves. And we all know that when we're trying to encourage farmers to record information and do things, it comes very much from others and their peers rather than vets sometimes. So if that's something that they've started, and you'll find that by means of WhatsApp, that's brilliant, because then that's already done some of the legwork for you. And you'll get information as well about what they want to talk about and what problems they're facing. And again, that's got to help you in terms of what you might want to put out in terms of newsletter content, or the next meeting, or areas to look at in the practice. So I think they are brilliant, and they've really revolutionized how we talk to farmers, and they've really improved our relationships and engagement with farmers. We just have to not get bogged down with them ourselves, and make sure that they know that we might not answer immediately, and give kind of a 24-hour turnaround on it. And actually, by doing that, you'll find a lot of the time that the farmers answer each other's questions, and you can just very quickly put a thumbs up or yes what they said, and that again continues the engagement and helps you as well. So that can be quite useful.
There's just been a question about how do you keep the vet mobile number anonymous on the WhatsApp.
I just saw that as well. You probably can't. I don't think
you can on a WhatsApp. For WhatsApp, so most we haven't set any up from a business point of view. WhatsApp's quite a business, you have to be a business account, so we haven't set up any business ones. It's much more farmer led generally with them. So Phillipa's involved with quite a few of the Welsh ones, which is where you're sort of just a part of someone else's group, aren't you? But that might be something to consider from a practice point of view, that you would have to do it from a you'd have to have a business one. I know there's some issue with that.
I mean, it's not to say that you don't get questions at inappropriate times, or and they could be quite emergency related questions, but as long as generally they understand that that's not what it's for. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I can't answer that now, we need to phone the practice, or have that practice number at the top, or have something on there that means they need to, it's not a 24-hour service. But that, I understand that can get quite difficult, because it is it's my personal number on all of these groups. And likewise on the Facebook as well, the messenger groups are personal as well, I suppose. So there is, it's a risk. There's probably areas that we need to look at there.
This is so. Phillipa, keep going talking about this. So this is something we've been engaged with farmers with in the last.
So it could be. So we are doing a colostrum project, and some vets on here that are based in Wales have probably heard about this from their farmers. So as an example of engagement, this is something that we are doing because we're working with a lot of discussion groups anyway, but it might be something that in your practice you want to set up as a way of keeping your farmers bonded to you and potentially to each other, and keep that discussion going when we can't actually get out on farm. So something really simple that you could think of to start on one of those groups or as a means of contact could be really benefit you. So one that we're doing is the colostrum project. So we are, as it says on there, we've got 160 bricks refractometers are out in Wales on farm with farmers that we're working with in discussion groups, and we're asking them to check colostrum from at least 10 ewes in the first week, and then at least of lambing, and then at least 10 ewes in the last week of lambing. And we hopefully are going to get a huge amount of information here in terms of colostrum quality, but also variables leading up to that, because we've asked for diet information and we've asked for ration formulation and body condition score and all of the information that you can see there on that table. So this has been really good as a follow-on from so if you were running a flock health club meeting, for example, and you were looking for the next point of discussion or potentially benchmarking, if you were looking at what you might talk about over the summer or early spring, something like this or getting some information like this could be useful, so you've got something to pull together to then talk about as we go forward. And certainly at lambing time, and we've talked about how to use it, and we've put that on the WhatsApp groups, and we've got information back from farmers there already, really chuffed with the fact that they're using their refractometers and what they've actually found. And it's nice, it's really good to see, and it's keeping that contact with the farmers. So we're doing this very remotely, and it might just be an example of a project that you may be able to get going in your practice.
Yeah, almost anything that just means that just moving people on or giving them something else that kind of a point of contact, and make it as undemanding as possible as well. So, you know, no, we're not pretending this is a scientific thing, but actually in your first week you could probably get to 10 ewes, and in your last week of lambing, when things are, you know, we're not asking people to do something at a time of year where they're actually too stressed to even think of it. So we'll let you know how it goes, how we get on with it. And actually that moves us on, Tommy, to the scoreboarding, where you've got this lovely photo of Phillipa, which is
This is back to data protection. I took this off the internet without her permission, and she was giving out to me just before we went live. I could have picked a better picture. Look, I'm conscious of time as well. Just look, one thing I look at in farming is that we have the metrics of where we are around land performance in different areas of our livestock production systems, and we still need to move the dial forward. So we've got to look at new ways of doing it, and I think you guys have captured a lot of this, but you know, it's down to what truly motivates people, and I think we can do a little bit better around farm performance. And you know, constantly talking about the financial piece is important, but there's other ways of motivating people, and I suppose scoreboarding is about, you know, setting people off against each other, giving people a goal and a target, maybe a process to get there. But we're really are impacted by what others are doing and our peers. And this is Phillipa running, and I know she runs like 30 miles, and I'm quite jealous of her, the distances she covers. But we were both involved in a charity event called Run 1000, which was in the UK and Ireland. Different countries had teams, and what I found is I run about 40 kilometers if I'm lucky at a month, and I ran 3 times that because I was watching where I was on the scoreboard. I was interacting with other people I know in agriculture that were in the group, and you know, I've seen this happen on the 2 dairy farms I work with as well, and it was unintentional, that the farm's best progress is occurring when they're competing against each other. Now people will say that's the wrong type of attitude, you know, what happens to people who are falling off the wagon? But we're talking about committed groups of people in Flock Health Club. We're talking about people who are there and engaged for a reason. I think scoreboarding and setting a goal and comparing and contrasting is a great social driver for change. That's my experience. So the idea of virtual spreadsheets, just like Phillipa had there, will allow people to interact. So this is my own experience, and you know, unintentionally with our farms, the biggest driver. You have to have a goal for people, you have to have a plan, but then when you've given that, this competition, it was once known as benchmarking. Scoreboarding is much more is much cooler, but I think it's just an idea or a concept that I think is of value. And I've talked to and worked with larger farms around building protocols in and getting that system right, and looking at maybe in our grass-based systems, grass measuring is quite important. So how do you motivate all the team to do it? And what we found was actually using a scoreboard and who was doing the number of grass walks every year. So I did 30 last year, I did 20. It's just a way of thinking about it. There is the challenge that you are, if somebody's in the relegation zone, that's a challenge, but it's just, I think there's something in this, would be my opinion. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think.
Well, sometimes those guys who are down right at the bottom, that is their motivator. I'm not going to be there again next year. And yeah, I've seen it with number of fecal egg counts that farmers have taken. They constantly, where am I on the board? So even if you've put your board up and it's all anonymous, everyone knows which is them, and but often by the end of the meeting they all know who everyone else is as well, because it comes out. But it's got to be, you've got to be anonymous, but by the end of it people are wanting to improve. I would agree with that. So and we'd probably call it benchmarking rather than scoreboarding, but scoreboarding's better. People are bored with benchmarking, so let's scoreboard. That's a good point, I suppose. So Phillipa doesn't like the photo of her having just run a marathon.
Well, that's what when you Google Phillipa, that's the first picture that comes up. So I'm blaming the Internet of Things and Google.
So I think this is just a summary of yes, what to do and what not to do. To talk around it, but do come back in with your questions and we'll try and answer them.
Can I just going back to what Tommy said about the scoreboarding? I think it's really useful because it helps farmers understand what's achievable, because we talk about industry targets and we talk about industry scoreboards, and sometimes they can just be really far away from that farmer because they don't know who it is and they don't know, and it probably doesn't apply to them. But then if they know that it's farmers within the same practice, so it's within it's your farmers, it's likely to be their neighbours, they can see what people are achieving, they can see what rearing percentages and levels of lameness and so on have actually been achieved. It can make it a bit more attainable, and it can maybe encourage them to speak to you as vets and say, okay, so how's that farm doing that then? What did they do? And just eking out that information and helping them to get on there. So I think that can be really useful.
That was helpful. So one of our questions on our chat was ideas of parameters we would assess, and I think levels of lameness is just encouraging people to record, and if the first sort of thing that you're scoreboarding is actually what you've recorded or that you are recording is a good start. But the colostrum is a complicated one because they all need a little bit of kit and everything. But numbers of cases, but concentrate, make it quite focused. Don't try and get figures for everything. But if they're interested in joint ill, we'll just go with joint ill. Numbers of cases, when do they happen? That sort of thing is useful. Keep it simple and targeted to what that group are most interested in. I think that's the key. We all have our ideas of what we'd like, but actually if there's something that they're motivated or interested in, that's a place to start, very definitely. Somebody else has also asked about wanting some charts and reasons for losses, and so both so there's data lists, AHDB website, we've got quite easy recording charts, and Project Lamb, the MSD Project Lamb, they've got some recording charts, and there are other things available. So there's definitely stuff out there. So either contact us or you can find stuff on the web quite easily for useful recording things. Is there anything on this, what to do and what not to do, that we haven't already covered? I think.
Sorry, Phillipa.
Oh no, I was just going to say, talking about presentations and having loads of information on slides. I think you mentioned that, Tommy, at the start, but I would also say write your own slides and have your own style. Fiona and I's style is very different, and when we come to write, and she hates my slides when it's a presentation that she might be using, always changes it, but that's fine, because when you're actually delivering it, if it's a bit of a surprise and it's not how you're used to seeing things, it can be really, really off-putting. So at least if you've written your slides, and by doing that, it's refreshed you of the information as well and the content. so you've at least you've practiced it as well a little bit. So that would be just something to add.
Yeah, speaking to somebody else's slides is a horrible thing, isn't it? You know how you want to talk and how it happens. So even today, just we couldn't give Tommy control of the slides because we couldn't work out the technology, and so he's had to, yeah, which is annoying. I think the take-home messages, you know, having a story that goes through the thread of what you're doing or how your meeting's going, then the storytelling thing, the personal and the fact that it follows through is quite important. But having key messages as opposed to just chaos. Don't judge this webinar.
I would think as well, particularly for maybe younger vets who are starting out, I'm not sure of the demographic of the audience or the age, but you know, it's a very difficult place to start, you know, so just starting sometimes is, and you'll have a couple of desperately uncomfortable meetings, but being yourself, I think we all have to try and jump outside our comfort zone occasionally. And you know, the other thing about when you have to present something, you'll never forget it. You know, if you don't know everything there is to know about colostrum and you have to put a presentation and go through the pain of researching it and putting it together, you'll remember it forevermore, and you'll bring that information with you and you just get better. So I think embrace it when the opportunity arrives. And you know, there will be uncomfortable moments, and technology will leave you down. And we had a bit of panic. We had a little bit of panic before we started. You know, I couldn't find my Zoom link and all that sort of stuff. But you know, it's important to just go and give it a go, because there will be some uncomfort, but it's such a rewarding thing when you start doing it and you start delivering results. It's infectious because you know, you really can help people. And right back to my first slide, we've got a huge decade ahead of us in livestock production, and vets can play an absolutely key role, in particularly in sheep production systems. So that'll be my messaging on it. But give it a go, give it a crack.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I suppose so. Now your last slide, Tommy, looks a bit random. So can you just talk us through your last slide?
Yeah. I am a bit random. Again, back to being comfortable in your own skin. I know I'm not afraid to dip in and out of philosophy and different things, but it's a simple idea. Okay, so when we do presentations online, we tend to leave the last slide up as questions or thanks very much, and it's a pretty dead slide, and it can often fill the conversation for 10, 15 or 20 minutes. So just think about that slide differently, about the message that you want to give to people. Okay, so if it's colostrum that you're focused on, your 2 or 3 key things, if that's going to be on the slide for the last bit, leave something impactful with people. So again, these are the words of George Bernard Shaw that I think I read them one day when I was landing in Amsterdam airport, actually, going to a conference in my Nuffield scholarship, and I found it was a time that I don't know, just for some reason I was a little bit overwhelmed where I was going, and I read these words, and I keep them pretty close. They're in the office in a few places, and it's about giving life a go. Life is short. We spend a lot of time working. That's my message today. You know, communication isn't easy, but if you start, you can get better at it. I haven't it cracked, and I probably never will, but I'll keep trying. So that's the idea of this message. But leave people with an impact on your last slide. That's my message there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tommy. Well, you've left us with a really good impression. Generally, so the splendid torch that you want to burn brightly, so that's a brilliant thing. So I suppose if anyone's got any questions, put them up. We've got to really end with the last slide, which really thanks our sponsors. So Bimeda, Elanco, MSD, Norbrook, Zoetis, HDB and SIVA. You know, so that has meant that these webinars are free to anyone who's watched them, both recordings or live. I suppose this was a bit of an afterthought, but we set up a Just Giving page for some webinars we did earlier in the year, and that's still open. If people want to donate, you know, that's great. We raised over £1,000 for Centrecow and Vet Life, and you're more than welcome to keep giving money to them. We'd be delighted. Please do ask any further questions, or you know, keep in touch. Oh, and what I haven't done, and I meant to remember this when I put the Colostrum is Gold, the sort of social media tag, is just to remind people. So Tuesday night, just a week yesterday, next Tuesday night, we're speaking with Kaz from up Rothbury Way, Hazel Mullins and Tom Searle, who are all social media sensations. Not that you're not, Tommy.
No, don't worry. I'm comfortable with the whole social media thing. I think, can I just say as well, I didn't say it too, thank both of you for having me on, and as well, the whole idea of flock health clubs and where it started and where it's come, it's fantastic, and you should be delighted with what you've done. And it's just to see you're advocating and the advice you give. I mean, I literally do some sheep work as well. I do presentations and I cog your stuff off the internet. Now that I realize you can trace pictures and everything. But no, thank both of you for the work that you do, and keep up the great work as well. So it's been a real privilege for me to be on board here for today.
Yeah, well, we'd be really delighted that you joined us, Tommy. I've just been, Kaz is just, I wouldn't even begin to try Kaz's surname online. He can say it himself next week, but do join us on Tuesday night. So you register in the same way, either via our newsletter or a tweet or something like that. You can just click in and register. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Someone's just asked about getting hold of colostrum readers. I'm afraid the bricks, you just have to go to Amazon. And I'm not a great fan of Amazon, but they have delivered Brixes for us. So yeah, we're looking forward to next Tuesday. Keep in touch with us, keep going. I'm delighted that people are still running their clubs despite the circumstances. Yeah, stay in touch and be encouraged. Thank you very much, Tommy. Thanks, Phillipa.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Tommy. That was really inspiring. If you're not inspired after that, then I don't know what will inspire you. So it's great to hear you speak, Tommy, and your whole journey. And it just shows that with passion, which you've obviously got, that just drives other people's passions. So if it's just go with it, I think was your message.
Yeah, absolutely. Life is short. It's a brief candle. On that note, cheerio.
Brilliant. Thanks all.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.